Okay. As promised, joining us today to try to make sense of this Arizona Coyotes, disaster of a public vote is ESPN senior writer and the founder of the Puck Daddy blog and the former co-host of Puck Soup,
Yeah,
Greg Wyshynski. Welcome to Conduct Detrimental for your maiden appearance.
it's great to be here, man. I'm a longtime follower on the old Twitter machine, and it's great to try to talk to somebody about all of this. I've been covering this, and this being the Coyotes mess for over a decade now, and it there was a sense of finality, and then none there may not be. So we'll see.
Well, I mean, the first question right off the bat, Greg, I mean, there are so many issues hovering over this franchise, dark clouds, multiple ownership changes, bankruptcies. They even had a minority owner forced out for allegedly strangling his wife. I mean, that's sort of a first. Eviction from Glendale. Now we have the failure of a public vote for a new stadium or new arena project that wasn't going to involve any public money except for remediation costs for the former landfill site I think there were some tax breaks, but by and large, this new arena was going to be privately funded by the Coyotes ownership group. So how could it have failed? Polling was showing that it was running in the high 50s. What went wrong here based upon your observations of, and knowledge of the history of this?
So you mentioned that it's mostly privately funded, and 1.9 billion of a 2.1 billion dollar project was going to be privately funded by Alex Morello, their owner. The For those that don't know, the Coyotes arena wasn't just an arena; it was an entertainment center, and part of the entertainment center was going to be a casino, and part of it was going to be residential houses, and those two things are very important because one, you had a lot of people saying we don't want a casino in that corner of Tempe, so that was one thing that was contentious. The residential housing part of it actually resulted in a lawsuit from the city of Phoenix with regard to the airport that's located somewhat near where the site was going to be, and it would involve flight patterns and an old statute from like the 1980s. It's very complicated, but let it be known that putting residential houses there, or residential housing there, was going to be an issue as well. How did they lose it? Well, we just mentioned 1.9 of 2.1. Well, that means that there is public funds for this project. And while you could make the argument that if you're cleaning up a landfill, you're going to have to use public funds at some point, which was the argument the Coyotes were making, it was still grist for the mill for the opponents of this project to say, don't give tax breaks to billionaires. Don't use public funding to build arenas. They could say that, and they were right because there was a modicum of public funding involved. So they ran on that. They ran on the casino thing. There was the problem with the residential thing. The Glendale stuff you mentioned with the Coyotes being evicted from basically their arena there, having a lot of financial strife about missed payments and things like that, that followed them to Tempe. And there was a lot of concern about, okay, what if this project all of a sudden gets weird with the Coyotes trying to like break the deal or something? So that was floating in the ether. There was a lot out there, but what it came down to, because I talked to the Coyotes that week and they thought they were up by 10 points in the polling. What it came down to is get out the vote. And their opponents were very, very early and effective in their messaging. There is some dispute as to whether their opponents spent more money or the Coyotes did. The Coyotes have disputed that with me, that they believe that they spent more money in messaging, but their opponents were well funded. And then there was one other thing I found out after the vote didn't pass, which is that while the Coyotes got a number of labor unions in line with this proposal and got endorsements from like labor unions, former mayors, city council, all these people, there was a couple of unions, or at least one union, that would have been central to building the arena that they didn't get. And they weren't going to guarantee union jobs for that part of the project. And growing up in a union house myself, having covered politics before, that could be the difference in a close local vote. It's just having that get out the vote mechanism in place, and they didn't have that for this one. So I think the other side was well organized and more motivated. And the last thing I'll say about that too, and I'm sorry to ramble on this, but because there's a lot to it. It's a local vote. It's in Tempe. There are a lot of Coyotes fans in Scottsdale, in Phoenix, in other parts that aren't Tempe. If this was a Maricopa County vote, I think it passes like pretty easy. But it's a Tempe vote. and it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. You want to build the arena to make fans in Tempe. You can't make fans in Tempe till you build the arena, and the fans in Tempe are the ones that are going to help you build the arena. So it became kind of a chicken or the egg thing a little bit for them too.
Yeah, I mean, I question whether this even needed to go to a public vote. I read some of the land use amendments and proposals. This was not legally required to be conducted as a special election. The city council could have just approved this, but
Right.
there wasn't enough support on the city council because there wasn't enough money coming from the Coyotes to remediate the landfill site. So instead of persuading that fourth member of the city council to pass it, they left it to the uncertainty of a ballot referendum, and you just never know how those things are going to go.
Yep. Yeah, that's correct, and you're right. I mean, I think that just shows you though the political sensitivity of approving this project and how the Coyotes, as a franchise, as a brand, I mean, I hate to say it, but they became kind of unreliable because of all the Glendale stuff. So after Glendale happens, and everybody in that part of the world has seen the city council meetings and all of the conjecture and all of the back and forth between them and the place they used to play, I don't think the city council politically felt comfortable just signing off on this project without bringing it to a public vote.
Okay.
But they also thought the public vote was a formality. I mean, let's be honest, like they signed off on this deal. They hardly endorsed it. A lot of politicians, including the current mayor, endorsed it. They did throw it to, like you said, to like caution, to the wind on this one a little bit. But they also thought that they had it in the bag, I think.
Well, the Islanders had a similar false sense of security 10 years ago with that lighthouse project that ended up being rejected by the voters, and it sent the Islanders on an odyssey to Brooklyn and then back to Elmont. But before we turn to the in-state options that are available as well as the potential relocation options, I have a more fundamental question. When you look at the size of the Arizona market, it's thought to be the 10th largest market, I guess, in the United States. And when you compare it to Tampa, it's certainly a much more important market. Yet Gary Bettman was able to hand deliver to gift Jeff Vinnick to the Tampa Bay area to rescue that franchise from the clutches of Len Barry. How come Bettman hasn't been able to find a sort of a desert version of Jeff? He doesn't have to be from the desert. He could be a hedge fund guy from New York like Jeff Vinnick. Why has the league faltered in placing the right owner in this desirable market? There certainly are better owners than the Morellos, and there are other Jeff Vinnick types out there. Why has Bettman not been able to thread this needle?
It's a good question. I tend to believe that part of it is the very thing we're talking about, which is the arena issue. I mean, if you go to Tampa now, and it's like Vinnick land, right? Like their arena is there, and then all of this development that Jeff Vinnick has helped create around it. Like it blew my mind to go cover the Lightning this year and then walk 2 blocks and there was a Whole Foods, because there certainly wasn't a Whole Foods next to that arena when I first started covering that team. But now, because of Vinnick and because of the success of the franchise and the growth of the fan base, there's been all this development around that arena.
Well, the winning begets winning. Steve Cohen, if he wins a World Series,
well, the winning is part of it,
but he wants in New York City.
But you have to remember, like, right, but the arena in Tampa is where the fans are, and I think part of the issue with finding a Jeff Vinnick, as you said, for the Coyotes, is that everyone knew playing in Glendale was a disaster. And so if you buy the team, now you've got to find a place to build the arena. And part of the reason that Alex Morello was seen as that guy for Bettman that could turn this franchise around is that he was motivated to buy the team and eventually move them to build this entertainment complex, because he's one of the only he holds one of the few, I think he's one of the few guys that holds a license in Arizona to do the thing that he wanted to do with the casino and everything.
He's got an online
and he owns casinos in Vegas.
Yeah. He's got a license to operate a sports book.
Right, he's got a license. So I think, well, it's not Jeff Vinnick, certainly, especially reputationally. They did find somebody who that would want to buy the team to then build something for that team, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, so I think the question that everyone now wants to know is, where do we go from here? And is this the end of the Coyotes as we know them? Is there a path forward towards hockey staying in Arizona? because that's what many fans want to see. And just for the sake of hockey and for this franchise, I would love to see hockey move forward in Arizona successfully. And I would love to hear your thoughts on how that could possibly happen. Or are we looking at the opposite and, this is the sign of the end and it's time to start looking externally?
So I wrote a column about this on ESPN last week, about the vote and the future of the Coyotes. And the first thing I'll say is that I don't think that the end of the Coyotes in Arizona is the end of hockey in Arizona, nor should it be. I mean, it's a great market. There's a lot of youth hockey that sprung up there. I mean, famously, Austin Matthews, one of the biggest hockey stars in the world, grew up a Coyotes fan. There's every reason to believe that it could succeed there, and there's every reason to keep trying because of the market. That being said, it kind of feels like the end of the road for this version of hockey in Arizona. There was a finality to that vote that you could feel. Gary Bettman, in his statement, did not talk about the future of hockey in Arizona. He did not, he's always been proactive about that. A lot of people say that he's been more passionate about keeping the Coyotes in Arizona than on any issue that he's been with as commissioner. The Coyotes themselves, you can feel a palpable sense of deflation. We'll get to how they've handled that in a second, but as far as the relocation markets go, I broke the story last week that they're going to play one more season at least in Mullet Arena. I think that's very smart. There is no plug and play Winnipeg type option right now for this team, even Quebec City. When it was determined that Atlanta was moving, that was determined like in the middle of May, and then 2 weeks later they announced Winnipeg. There's no option like that right now. So give yourself some time to find out what the right market's going to be. Give yourself some time to figure out who could own the team. And Daniel, the franchise valuations right now in the NHL are incredible. We're looking at over $1 billion for the Ottawa Senators. The money the Fenway Group just paid for the Penguins. You're going to be able to find a pretty decent amount of change for someone to buy this franchise. The nuance is, what markets do you see as relocation markets? What markets do you see as potential expansion markets? So you're looking at Houston, which I think is the favorite to be the next NHL city in some way, shape, or form. Salt Lake City, in both cases, the NBA owner there wants to have an NHL team in their building. In Salt Lake City's case, the intrigue is that the Delta Center, which was built in 1991, probably is going to get replaced by the time the Olympics roll around in Salt Lake City in either 30 or 34, I think it is. You have places like Atlanta again, Milwaukee, Kansas City has an arena ready. Quebec City's always in play. Portland, they'd love to go to. There's a number of places, but the two that I think to focus on right now are Houston and Salt Lake City. And then it becomes a question of, okay, Houston is such a massive market. Maybe you look at that as an expansion place versus a relocation place. But the bigger question there is, the NHL will have to be a tenant in Houston right now, because Tillman Fertitta owns the arena, owns the Rockets. And that's been a kind of a sticking block for the NHL. If they want to go to a market like Houston, they want it to be like Vegas. They want their team to have their own place and reap all the revenue benefits and not have to share it in a minority way with the Rockets.
How important are rivalries to the NHL's perspective? I mean, this balanced schedule has really, neutered and watered down the traditional rivalries. The Rangers and Devils only see each other 4 times until the 7-game series. Rangers and Islanders only play 4 times. How important is it to activate a Dallas/Houston rivalry, or to return to the high-flying days of the 1980s with the Quebec Nordiques and the Montreal Canadiens activating that segment of the French-Canadian fan base? Those uniforms were just amazing. And as a hockey fan, I'm more interested in the growth of rivalries than the growth of the game to new markets.
Well, we should move the Coyotes to Hartford, shouldn't we? I mean, hell, that was a great
theme.
Throw that team right in there.
If you ever listen to our podcast, we open and close with Brass Bonanza, Brian Burke's favorite song.
Yeah. Yep. And when I wrote my column, I said I had to include Hartford in there, or else I couldn't show my face in the ESPN cafe in Bristol, because they would have killed me if I didn't at least mention Hartford. Rivalries do matter. I mean, let's be honest. When Seattle was given their franchise, one of the things that was cited was now we have a team in close proximity with Vancouver, and what a rivalry that could be. I mean, it's one of the reasons they've talked about Portland is to have 3 teams over the Pacific Northwest. And it's funny you should mention Houston. I covered the Dallas Stars in Game 7 against the Kraken, And I noticed that their slogan for the playoffs, and it's probably extended beyond the playoffs, but their slogan for the playoffs is Texas hockey, you know? And I thought to myself, oh, that's really interesting. Like, you are trying to own the corner on Texas hockey. You probably throw a little trademark next to that term already, because you know there's a possibility that there will be another team in Texas at some point. And that rivalry would be great. Portland, Seattle would be great. The Quebec one, though, is interesting. And I'll tell you why. Like, I think the modus operandi for the NHL under Bettman in maybe the last like 20 years has been growing new fans and not underscoring the ones they already have. And I've talked to a lot of people around the league that believe that while Quebec City could be profitable potentially, it doesn't make new fans in the way that Houston does, in the way that Portland does, in the way that Kansas City would, Oklahoma City. Like, their idea is we need to grow our footprint. We need to change our demographics. Very important to Bettman. And I think that a move to Quebec or another Canadian city doesn't accomplish that in the same way that a move to a U.S. city does.
I wanted to transition to, we've been talking about team, and franchise and owner. Let's talk about the players, because they are heavily impacted by this and have been for a while. Number one, I wanted to know what your thoughts are on maybe what the players think about playing in Mullet Arena and what their thoughts are on the Coyotes long term. We've gotten comments now from Clayton Keller, or at least speculation that he'd like to see some direction on where the franchise is going, and with his impending free agency. And also we have Logan Cooley, who's returning to Minnesota for his sophomore season, and he likely would have been in the Calder running had he played last year. I mean, talk about NHL ready. Yeah. This is a kid who just dominated the country. Do you think that what's going on with the franchise and the vote implicated Cooley's decision, and where are players generally standing on this as they approach free agency and the like?
Yeah, Cooley's decision, I think, was separate from the vote. I think that was one, having covered the Frozen Four a little bit, I think that was one that people anticipated was going to happen. They would stay in school for another year. But I do think it's going to be fascinating to see what his feelings are about the future of this franchise, because he's a tremendous player. I mean, he might be the best player in that draft. So the Keller thing was, for those who don't know, is quite comical. His father tweeted out something about how Keller wasn't happy and won't be playing for the Coyotes when the season starts. He then claimed to Craig Morgan, a local reporter, that he was hacked, making this the first time in the history of hacking that someone hacked an account after an arena vote to talk about somebody's son maybe not playing for a franchise. Look, I've covered hacking for a long time as a digital journalist. I think this might have been one of those things where he forgot to toggle to the burner account. That's just what I'm saying. That's, again, no evidence of that. Just kind of following the dominoes falling here. So Keller might not be. I mean, Keller's a great player. He's got a long-term contract. I don't give grief to any of these guys if they don't want to do this again. Like, they were playing in Mullet for a very specific reason, which was to then get an arena in Tempe, with the promise of that happening. And that's not happening now. They've transitioned to this idea of maybe moving to Mesa, a former mall site. That again is going to be another potential public vote. I was told by a team executive that there was no plan B after this didn't pass. So the idea that now they're flopping and flailing and trying to create a plan, J, it's like, it's just too much if I'm a player. Like, I just can't deal with it anymore. And the players around the league too, like, you have to remember that this is a league issue. The money they don't bring in playing at Mullet is a league issue. The players from around the league having to play in Mullet is a league issue. And I've had some guys tell me, like, it's kind of fun, like, playing in a 5,000 seat arena. It brings you back to junior or college. And then have guys being like, this is a joke. Like, this should not be happening for a National Hockey League team. And remember, it's not just like last year and this year. It's potentially 2 more seasons after this too. Yeah. Them playing in an NCAA arena. So it's a tough look.
In a flat cap where the salary cap has only increased a couple of percentage points over a multi-year period. And I think playing in a 5,000 seat arena, adversely impacts the hockey related revenue and keeps the salary cap artificially deflated. But at what point, to close this out, I know, you got to go soon, but at what point does Gary Bettman begin to lose faith in the Morello in Alex Morello as an owner of an NHL franchise? Are we already at the point of no return with that ownership group, given its history, given the history in the market? I can't think of another NHL team that has been constructively evicted for not paying state taxes, having bad relationships with the tenant, having landlord-tenant disputes, and squeezing creditors on, nickeling and diming creditors, and now not being able to get a sure thing over the line. When will Bettman lose faith and just say, you know what? That's it for this group. We're going to look at other options.
It's a complicated question, because you could argue he maybe has lost faith in the Coyotes remaining in Arizona based on the statement that he put out. Like I said, like for those who don't know, like Gary Bettman has been intimately involved in this franchise for over a decade now. They were put in bankruptcy court by one owner, Jim Balsillie, the BlackBerry guy, tried to buy them through the bankruptcy process, get around the Board of Governors to move them to Hamilton. By the way, in the new BlackBerry movie, they do have an actor playing Gary Bettman, and they do reenact many of the scenes from Balsillie trying to buy the team. And I've seen them; they're great. Bettman has, like you said, he's found other owners. The Ice Edge and Jerry Reinsdorf, and like all of these names through the last decade of people that have flirted with buying the team or have bought the team. And Gary's been very adamant about trying to keep them there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time when he would make statements like, the Arizona Coyotes are going nowhere, or, this franchise is going to work, and all this other stuff. And we didn't hear that this week. So, I mean, there's something to be said for maybe him being a little exhausted by this process too. But the other thing I'll say is that one of the things that Bettman has also been very adamant about for decades, and I've covered him for a very long time, is teams staying in the market until no one wants to own them. And the team stays in the market until there's nowhere else to play. And so, like, you could argue that, okay, they don't have a place anymore to play because the arena plan didn't work. That'd be strike one, but they don't. But Morello still wants to own the team. Like he truly, in my conversations with people that know him, it's not simply just like, I bought the team to build a casino. Like, there's a certain amount of like legitimate family legacy he's looking to establish with this franchise, like making it something in that market, handing the keys to his kids one day. Like that's part of this. And so, on the one hand, you have this part of Bettman who says they should move because they don't have a place to play. And on the other hand, you have this part of Bettman that says, but they do have somebody who wants to own the team and use his money at probably a loss leader based on his other businesses to own the team. And so I don't know where Gary's mind is going to be on this one. We'll find out soon. I mean, he's going to be at the draft and all these other events, and Lord knows the French guys in the back of the room will be raising their hands to ask about Quebec City like they always used to. But we'll get a better sense of I think what the NHL is thinking on this. And also, I guess the NHL is thinking about this new Mesa arena plan that the Coyotes have put out there to try to like put the fire out.
Well, Greg, if you're at the press conference, hopefully you could put in a good word for Hartford. And maybe this is just the beginning. Really, this vote is just the beginning of the next, saga of the Arizona Coyotes journey. Who knows where it leads? Clayton Keller may be wearing a different uniform next year. Logan Cooley might be the most impactful college free agent on August 15th, 2026. There's a lot still remaining to explore here. We thank you so much for spending your time joining us on Conduct Detrimental to kind of flesh through all these various tributaries of the story, because there are so many angles, and it is a pleasure as always. And I hope you'll consider coming back and being a guest on our podcast again. It's always great to have the first time we've had you, and you were terrific. Thanks again for joining us today.
Would love to. My only hope is that we find a way to get Deadpool to own the Coyotes. It doesn't look like it's going to happen in Ottawa. I need Ryan Reynolds in full Deadpool gear at the Board of Governors meeting, just cracking wise in the back of the room. It's my dream.
Yes, we absolutely do. And thank you, Greg. Enjoy the rest of the playoffs, and we really, really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Okay, that was ESPN senior hockey writer Greg Wyshynski, helping break down, the sort of the diagnosis of the failure of the Arizona Coyotes arena vote. And there you have it. I mean, there are a lot of questions that still remain to be, a lot of questions still to be answered. And we'll find out over the course of the next year whether there are any viable in-state options or whether this is just going to be the next NHL relocation.
Yeah, and I really, really hope this works out in Arizona with that passionate fan base, and just they got to find a city to make this work. They got to find a stadium to make this work, and hopefully the current owner is sufficient to make this work as well. Although we don't have evidence of that, but really a terrific episode.
Counter evidence of that.
Right, absolutely. Yes, we have much counter evidence of that. But yeah, this was terrific, and to have Greg on, who has been at the forefront of the story, and like he said, he broke the news of the team staying at Mullet Arena for at least next season. And you know, he's really one of the top NHL reporters nationally.
Yep. No question about it. You know, he and I have been following each other on Twitter for a couple of years, and I know you and he have engaged. It was really fun to meet him for the first time, and now we know him. So Greg will hopefully come back and join us on a future episode of Conduct Detrimental. This is just a fun episode to do. We've covered a sort of a double-barreled episode. The Dan Snyder, Washington Commanders continued quagmire, leading to litigation from unexpected sources, and leading us all the way back potentially to former Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos. And now we have the continuation of the Arizona Coyotes uncertain ownership and uncertain arena situation, which is now in a state of flux, as this public vote has resoundingly rejected the Coyotes stadium proposal. So now we wait to see where the other shoe will drop. All in all, it was a fun episode, Jason. It was our first time. It was the Dan and Jason podcast. Let's do this again. You and I could really focus on NHL issues and hockey issues going forward, and there's no shortage of those. So hopefully you and I will be able to team up again on a future Conduct Detrimental episode. We hope everybody enjoyed this. When you have a chance, go give us a good rating on Apple or Spotify. And every week we bring the best stories in sports law, broken down by lawyers. Uniquely by lawyers. These are inevitably stories that connect the sports industry and law and business. And I think we're the best ones at being able to sort of break down the legal implications of these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, we should definitely do more hockey. We are the two resident Ranger fans on the podcast. And just a funny nugget, when Greg first joined, he blurted an expletive at me because he saw my Rangers hat. As many of you know, he, being a New Jersey native and a big Devils fan, he is openly anti-Rangers. But the rest of us on this episode are pro-Rangers. So anyway, I would definitely love to do more hockey content and related to the law. And there's plenty of stories that come out all the time with the league, and the legal implications don't seem to go away. So we'll have plenty more to talk about.
All right. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Conduct Detrimental. Join us next time, where I'm sure we're going to be covering some lawsuit or NFL related story. And the Commanders sale has sort of a trajectory that will never end. So I imagine we'll be talking about that ownership situation over the course of the next couple of months. Again, thank you everybody for joining us this week on Conduct Detrimental. For Jason Morin, I'm Daniel Wallach. See you next time.